This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, we're going to look at prophetic signs, the signs of the times that Jesus Christ spoke about in the Bible, and the fact that so many, perhaps the largest percentage of prophetic signs have occurred since the beginning of the history of the world in the last 40 years. Think about that. People have been talking about the end of the world, the end of the age, the second coming of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, for thousands of years, ever since Christ came about 2,000 years ago. And yet, perhaps in the last 50 years or so, we have seen more prophetic signs happen than ever before in the history of mankind. Now that amounts to something. What that amounts to is that tells us that the probability of Christ returning in our lifetime, the statistics, the percentages, the ratios of Christ returning in our lifetime gets increasingly higher and higher as time goes on, because so many prophetic signs are happening simultaneously. So what does this tell us? Well, I'll tell you what it tells us, something that many of you can relate to, and we're going to get into in depth in the program. In fact, this would be a great program to send to somebody who might be skeptical about the signs of the times and Bible prophecy being unfolded. You can go to paulmcguire.us. There's a big banner for the Paul McGuire Report radio show, and on the right-hand side, there's a whole list of social media icons, so they can play this program free from the archives on anything, on their cell phone, on their I'm spacing out here because technology keeps changing, on their laptop, on their iPhone, on their iPad. I mean, you name it. They can listen to it in their headphones when they're jogging or shopping, whatever makes it easy for them. And you know, if people don't have computer technology, as some people don't, you can always make a copy for them on a DVD. And if it's somebody who's older or whatever, and they're more familiar with just sticking a DVD into the machine, you can do it that way. Anyway, lots of options for you technologically if you go to paulmcguire.us. So we have, well, let's start with the most important prophetic sign. The most important prophetic sign occurred in 1948. That was God's prophetic super sign. And that was when the Jews finally, after over 2,000 years of dispersion, returned to the land of Israel as Jesus predicted, and as all the Old Testament prophets predicted, and as was predicted in the Abrahamic covenant. Christ was telling his disciples before he ascended into heaven. He was having a conversation with the disciples, and in the background of where they were talking was this magnificent and huge Jewish temple that was made even more magnificent through the monetary contributions of King Herod. And Jesus Christ was, they were asking Christ, what will the signs be of your return? And there Christ began to give them some of the signs of Christ's return. But one of the things he predicted on the Mount of Olives as he was speaking to his disciples, one of the things he predicted was the fact that the temple behind them, the Jewish temple. Now remember, in Judaism, the very center of the religion involves and revolves around the temple. In fact, the synagogue shouldn't be looked at as like the equivalent of a Christian church. See, a Christian church doesn't need a temple People can meet in physical buildings called churches, but the center of Judaism is the activities that go on at one central temple. That's why you don't see Jewish temples in the true sense of the word built anywhere else, because the only true Jewish temple is the temple that was built by various leaders in Israel. It all started with that tent. When they were wandering around the wilderness, they didn't have a building, so they had that portable tent. And what that portable tent was it was a portable temple. And they conducted animal sacrifices and worship and repentance and various ceremonies. So the Jewish temple is the center of their religion. Now, when Christ came, he predicted that the temple, Herod's temple, which was behind them, would be destroyed. And that's exactly what happened, is that the Roman general Titus invaded Jerusalem not that long after Jesus gave that message. And that's the message, by the way, where he ascended into heaven. And the disciples were a little bit freaked out, and the angel said, "Don't, I'm giving you a very modern paraphrase, don't freak out. Jesus Christ is going to return in the same manner that he left." In other words, they were indicating that Jesus Christ is going to return descending from the heavens, just like when he ascended into the heavens. But when Christ returns, it will be at an event called, I'm talking about his final return. It will be an event called the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, what happened was that that temple, as Jesus Christ predicted, was destroyed when the Roman general Titus came in, as Christ predicted, because he warned his disciples that, this entire temple behind you is going to be destroyed. It's going to be rubble. Not one stone will be left upon another, Jesus said. And so that's exactly what happened. And when that happened, the temple was brutally destroyed. It was just ripped apart, brick by brick, stone by stone, and they set it on fire, the Roman soldiers, and they robbed it of all its gold and anything of value. It was robbed, and the gold was heated up so hot inside the temple because of the fires burning, that just as Jesus Christ predicted, the gold turned into like a molten liquid gold and ran through the streets of Jerusalem, and tragically many Jews were slaughtered. And those that were not slaughtered, they were sold into slavery into the four corners of the world. All over the world, they were sold into slavery. Now, they were dispersed from Jerusalem, which was their promised land, by the way. The land of Israel is the promised land for the Jews. And they were dispersed from their promised land. They were dispersed from Jerusalem for over 2,000 years. And then after World War II ended, and this was a tragic series of events where approximately 7 million people died in the Holocaust conducted by the occult Nazi Party and their demon-possessed leader, Adolf Hitler, which was a completely occultic party, by the way, and something I write about continually in my books because people continually need to be educated about this. So if you read my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, the first one, or Mass Awakening, or Are You Ready, or The Day the Dollar Died, and even the brand new book that you can still pre-order, it will be out in a couple of weeks, Conquering the Matrix, you will read the account of the fact that the political party known as the Nazi Party in Germany was an occult, satanic party first and a political party second. That's very hard for people in America and even in Europe to grasp, because we don't have, thank God, at any present time, all of our political parties are essentially political. We have essentially two powerful political parties, Democrat and Republican. But we don't have a political party that's first and foremost an occult party. Germany did, and that's the party that put Hitler into power. So he was put into power by a group of secret, satanic, German occult parties and societies like the Vril Society, the Thule Society, and others. And they put him into political power. And one of the things that Hitler did, because he believed in the genetic creation of a master race by manipulating the DNA, you look at the whole regime of the Third Reich and Hitler and the Nazis, and it's a very strange set of circumstances, because they were so futuristic in their thinking that it really boggles the mind. They were either the most ingenious political power structure to gain power in the last 300, 400 years, or they were getting information from a supernatural source, because they were so far beyond America and Britain and the other nations and their technology and their science that one wonders how they got the information. In any case, they were about the business of what's called eugenics, the science of eugenics, and that is simply, people don't use that word publicly anymore, but it's a very active science even at this moment. It's not discussed publicly, it's disguised with other biological scientific terms, because they don't want to give away the truth of what they're really doing to the dumbed down masses. The science of eugenics is and was the genetic science of breeding a master race of what the Nazis and other groups believed. You could breed scientifically a master race, a god race, that was superior. Hitler was convinced of this. And in the science of eugenics, you use what's called selective breeding. You deliberately allow male and females that you perceive to be genetically superior in all attributes to mate and reproduce, and then you deliberately sterilize, abort, kill, or whatever other racial groups or other individuals that you believe. When I say you, I'm talking about this Nazi occult party. I'm not talking about you or me. It's what they believed. And I'm not a racist. I don't believe in genetic engineering, and I don't believe in eugenics, and I don't believe there's a master race. I believe that the infinite personal living God of the universe, the biblical God, created all races equally for his plan and purposes. And since we're all related genetically, I mean, whether you want to admit it or not, whether you like it or not, we all have the same great-great-great-great-grandmother and the same great-great-great-great-grandfather, and we could go on with a lot more greats. But we all have the same original mother and father, genetically, Adam and Eve. Now, there are variations over thousands of years, not due to Darwin's theory of evolution, but there are variations in the races in terms of skin color and height and certain physical attributes, etc. But God didn't create a superior race or an inferior race. However, I do believe that God has gifted different races with special giftings. And that shouldn't be a cause, and I believe he did so equally. So when you add up all the giftings that each race possesses, it comes out equal. I don't think God, I know God isn't a racist, because it says that he created man. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. Well, that implies that God created man with his DNA. And if God created man in his own image, male and female, that obviously means that God has attributes that would be considered black and white or brown or Hispanic or Asian or whatever. All of that, all of those different races reflect the image of God. So you can't hate or dislike somebody of another race because they're made in the image of God. And they're part of God's family as he intended it to be. So this concept of a master race is a satanic idea, and it's built on pride, of course. Now, who was it? Eugenics has been around for a long time. Who kind of launched eugenics? Well, if you read my books like Mass Awakening and the first book of Prophecy of the Future of America, and The Day the Dollar Died, and the brand new book that you can pre-order, Conquering the Matrix, you will see that a secretive elite has been behind eugenics. And they are primarily white people. White people specifically from the British Isles. Great Britain is a center of that, and some of the other nations in Europe of white people believe secretly that they're a master race. And then there are Americans of British descent or Scandinavian descent or whatever. I mean, the average person, that I speak to, they don't believe, just because they're white, they're part of a master race. But there are some, among the elite especially, who do. And these elite love to run around lecturing everybody about tolerance and social justice. They put on a big show to fool the masses. And they specifically want to sucker punch and fool what would be described as minorities. They spend a ton of money on PR and promotion, the elite do, to convince the minorities or the non-white races that they are their champions, that they're there with their United Nations and all the rest of their garbage, which they use lies and propaganda, that they're there to make sure that everybody gets a fair shot, everybody's equal. But let me tell you something. If you're African American and you're listening, or if you're white and you're listening, or if you're Asian, or whatever ethnic group, whatever racial group you come from, you better open your eyes, especially those of you. Well, no, actually, you better open your eyes, those of you that are white, and think, you have some kind of a little bit of leverage in society. A lot of people who are African American and Latino and of other races think that all these white people think they're so privileged. Well, you know what? White people, I believe, did have some kind of socioeconomic advantage in America and other places 50 to 100 years ago and back before then. That was true. But look, the average white person today, middle class and working class, hey, don't deceive yourself. There's no special status or privilege for being white in today's America. And I know people in other races would, violently disagree with me. But I remember when being white gave you an advantage. That is, I'm not saying it's non-existent, but it's greatly reduced. So the point I'm trying to make, though, is this. All these politicians who come, they're genetically part of these elite families. Some people call them Illuminati bloodline families. Now, it's impossible to prove the genetic records or the genealogy of what's called Illuminati bloodline families. because you're not going to get access to their DNA. But there is some truth to that, whether you want to call it Illuminati, bloodline families, or whatever you want to call it. There are elite families of the ruling class and the elite that go back hundreds and hundreds of years, at the very least. Some claim to go back 1,000 years. And these families are the privileged, the powerful, the kings and queens, the sons of royalty, the sons and daughters of great wealth. This is the elite, and they're, mainly white. They are not middle class or working class. They're way above that. They belong to all kinds of secret occult societies. And secretly, even though they talk endlessly about social justice, even though they pretend they're passing all these laws to make things equal, and so many African Americans fall for it, tragically. They really believe that these wealthy, elite white people are going to help them. No, I don't. The smart ones don't believe it, but a lot of them do. And they're racists. And, let's take Great Britain and England and America, okay? Let's just take those nations. And let's take some of the Scandinavian nations in Europe, okay? And let's go back to World War II, and let's look at the truth. The truth was that even though it was Hitler and his occult regime that either incinerated or gassed to death or shot to death over 7 million people in the Holocaust, perhaps the majority of them were Jews, but anybody who wasn't considered part of the master race, if you were white and you had mental illness or physical frailty or whatever, they would sterilize you or kill you. So, and a lot of Protestants were killed during the Holocaust. And so Hitler had the first DNA dictatorship. He was actually implementing. Now I want you to get out of your shoebox, get out of your baby shoebox mind. Okay? Should I diverge into a weird story for just a moment, or do you want me to stay on track? I think some of you are saying, stay on track, Paul. You diverge into weird stories. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm not going to tell the weird story, which probably will get me in more trouble than if I had told the entire weird story. I'll give a little hint. And if I get some emails saying, hey, we want to hear the whole weird story, I'll tell it. Otherwise, I'm going to stay on track. But I talked to this guy one time, about 20 years ago, and he was a professional shoe salesman in a shoe store. Now, this was about 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. I don't remember exactly, but that's the general time frame. I want to remind you that back then in America, a man could be a shoe salesman working in a small shoe store, and he could make enough money to support his wife and children modestly but comfortably. That was once upon a time in America. People who were salesmen at Sears or salesmen at car dealerships, or you could name the amount of stores and retailers and occupations where men, and some women, but back then it was mainly men, but the women were increasingly getting into the sales force. Men who worked for Sears or they were car salesmen or shoe salesmen, they could make a modest but decent living to support their wives and kids and buy a house with just one person working. And think about that in a shoe store. Now, I would imagine in the upper end shoe stores, they could make, at least a middle class living back then, just one guy working. And I know for a fact, not that I was a car salesman, but because of the career I've had to buy cars and sell cars constantly because it's always been a juggling act because I put so much mileage on cars. I mean, there's times in my own career in the radio talk show host business when I was driving 180 miles a day to work, 6 hours each way. I was burning out cars in a year. They had so much mileage, it was ridiculous. So I was constantly buying and selling cars. And I remember when I was buying cars earlier on, this was decades ago, a good car sale, an average car salesman was making $55,000, $60 something thousand. But remember, this was like 30 years ago when $60,000 was a lot of money. It's not like today when $60,000 can't buy you much because the value of the dollar's crashed. Some of you that are younger, it's hard for you to wrap your heads around this, but there was a time that if you made $50,000 to $60,000, you were making good money and you could afford to buy a lot of things. It's not like that now. So that's why Trump won. I mean, people don't get it. A lot of the people voted for Trump. Remember that, okay? Make America great again. Or an average guy who was willing to work hard could take, these weren't prestigious jobs. He could be a car salesman or whatever, and he could make a decent living. And in businesses like the car business, because the profit in the cars were much higher, I knew guys who were making $150,000, $200,000 a year selling cars. This was 30 years ago. You imagine, that would be like making $400,000 today. Okay, so there was a time in America, and I deliberately censored the weird part of the story. So anyway, the point is that you have these different racial groups, but the people on the top of the pyramid, the elite families. And I couldn't figure this out when I was a kid, okay, because I came from a middle-class family. By God's grace, a very educated family. My mother had a degree. My mother her father did really well. Ironically, I don't want to get into personals because who knows out there. My grandfather did really well in a particular business. So she had some extra bucks, let's put it that way. But essentially, we lived a middle-class lifestyle, okay? And, but we had friends who lived with in our neighborhood who went on and became very, very wealthy people. One in particular, who I think I've mentioned without mentioning his name, is probably, he was my best buddy, my childhood friend. He had two brothers. We spent 4 hours a day playing, constantly. And I go back to Manhattan, and he's on the cover of every major magazine all the time, and he is the top man. He's the CEO. Let's just put it this way. He's the CEO of one of the largest multinational banking institutions in the world. I can't even imagine what he's worth. So the point I'm trying to make, though, and I'm not accusing him of being a racist, by the way, because when I knew him as a child, he was not a racist at all. So I don't think he would have become a racist. But many, though, of the elite at the very, very, very top are racist, but they pretend to be these liberals for social justice, and they're not. They belong to secret occultic parties. They believe in genetic superiority. And I'm not going to name the names of these families, but you would know them because they're household names. So anyway, Hitler got his methodologies for breeding a master race from the Rockefeller laboratories on eugenics. I think it was in Cold Springs, in New York. Okay, they had laboratories for the study of the science of eugenics, which was the breeding of a master race. Now, you do the math. Rockefeller is funding laboratories on the science of eugenics, which is for the purpose of breeding a master race. He's connected to whatever degree with Margaret Sanger, who's the founder of Planned Parenthood. Now, Planned Parenthood covers this up with propaganda, and the mainstream news media, which is the fake media and won't report the truth, will never tell you the truth about Planned Parenthood. But Margaret Sanger's primary objective as the head of Planned Parenthood, and she had a relationship with the eugenics laboratories and Rockefeller, she planted or had her abortion clinics placed mainly in minority neighborhoods intentionally. Tracking with me? Because Margaret Sanger's goal was the same as the Rockefeller Eugenics Laboratories' goal, was to reduce and get rid of what she, Margaret Sanger, perceived as the inferior races. So they put all the abortion clinics in the neighborhoods of what she and the elite thought were the inferior races, which was primarily most of the abortion clinics went in black neighborhoods, Hispanic neighborhoods, and other minority or ethnic groups. Now, as time went on, they were also put in white neighborhoods, etc. But to this day, as far as I know, the majority of the abortion clinics and Planned Parenthood facilities are either in or near minority neighborhoods, which I can't speak about today, but it was done intentionally back then to eradicate population growth among what the elite considered inferior racial groups, genetically inferior. Now, that's a fact. You can read her writing. She was also, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was a member of the KKK, Ku Klux Klan. You know, you have all these lunatic mainstream media people with an IQ of about 25, not 125, 25, which makes them about as intelligent as a lemon. So the thing is that they never talk about the history of Planned Parenthood. She was a member of the KKK. They have pictures of it. And the KKK, you know, is a militantly white supremacist group. So the media is all bent out of shape because these neo-Nazis and these white supremacists have some kind of meeting and they blame it on Trump. But the reality is all the liberals, the movie stars and everybody else, are financing Planned Parenthood, which is far more, at least in its beginnings. I don't know what their present agenda is, but I haven't heard them I never heard them admit their history. But Planned Parenthood was founded by a female who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, who was an openly declared white supremacist and a Nazi sympathizer. So just because a bunch of kooks, hey, look, I've been all around this country, okay? There are people who have racial hostilities on both sides of the fence. But percentage-wise, numerically, there is no giant white supremacist conspiracy in America. It doesn't exist. There's no gigantic neo-Nazi movement in America. It doesn't exist. There isn't some giant neo-Nazi movement in America. It doesn't exist. It's a fiction of the media. Yeah, they do exist, but they're such a statistical minority. They basically don't amount to anything. And by the way, the people you see on television, those aren't the real leaders of those movements. Okay, so Sanger took Rockefeller's eugenics technology and used it and promoted it and got funding from him. And Hitler borrowed Rockefeller's science of eugenics material, and he used that, and Hitler was the first dictator to put scientific eugenics into full force, and that's what the Holocaust was about. And he went about sterilizing, killing, shooting anybody who was he perceived to be genetically inferior. Particular racial groups and ethnic groups he wiped out because he believed they were genetically inferior. And he went and he created what was called the Letters-Born program, which was an active Nazi program where they would deliberately get a bunch of younger Aryan types. By Aryan types, I mean, white. Their ideal visually was like very pale white skin, blue-eyed or like gray blue eyes. And they would get them to mate together. And of course, they had to be tall, strong, and intelligent and healthy. And they would get them to mate together in the Letters-Born program so that Hitler's master race would increase. Okay? But he got it from the science of eugenics from Rockefeller. Now, I was speaking at a Bible prophecy conference. I won't give away the location. And I was giving a series of messages, and my messages deal with prophecy first and foremost. But I talk about the Nazis and Hitler because you can't understand Bible prophecy without understanding what happened there. Because I believe when the Antichrist comes to power with the false prophet, there's going to be many similarities between the Antichrist government and what happened in the Nazi government. And Hitler was an occultic, satanic government, and even his top men believed, and they were in the occult too, but they were slightly frightened of him because they believed that Hitler was totally demon-possessed, which he was. So Hitler was breeding this master race, and they also believed that the Nordic races, the Scandinavian races, the races that produced the Vikings, like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and those places, were part of the genetic master race, blonde-haired, blue-eyed especially, or red hair and blue eyes or whatever. And so this all came from an occult mythology, by the way. And if you want to know about the cult mythology, then read my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, because it will blow your mind. And read Mass Awakening, and read Standing Down Goliath, and pre-order, because it's going to be out in a couple of weeks, Conquering the Matrix. The secret occult societies in Germany and in Great Britain and in the Scandinavian countries, they believed that, especially the Nazis, they believed in this master race that came from the stars through UFO-type flying machines, okay? And they believed this going back into the 1920s and before. There were so many intellectuals and scientists and occultists in Germany. And there's a guy named, forgot his name, it's Lytton, Bulwer Lytton, who wrote a book called The Coming Race. And it was a sci-fi novel that dealt with a master race, a pure master race that was genetically superior. And it was a sci-fi novel, and he really sparked a movement, a philosophical movement. So the Nazis kind of blended the ancient Nordic legends of their god Wotan and the legends of the spiritual beliefs of the Nordic peoples and the Vikings, etc. The Nazis blended that belief system with occult teachings like Madame Blavatsky and others, who was a Satanist, and she talked about the 7 root races, and she talked about ancient Tibet being a place where the people, the super race of mankind secretly hid beneath the earth in ancient Tibet. So in the Nazi theology, occult theology, which is the case in so many of these ancient accounts in history that are recorded and developed not by Christians, but by occultists and pagans. But in some respects, their religious occultic belief system, to some degree, matches up with the Bible. And all of these occultic religions have a common theme of a great flood that flooded the earth. I mean, you can go through the list, and they all record this great flood. So what happened was this great flood began to destroy the inhabitants of planet Earth. So these star children who descended upon the earth in spaceships or whatever, and they were a genetic master race, they retreated to a massive underground civilization underneath Antarctica, and with entrances to this massive underground super civilization, where you could get into this super civilization deep under the earth at the North Pole and the South Pole, especially Antarctica. Now, in that giant, deep underground civilization, this master race of people escaped, and according to the Nazi legends, they survived the Great Flood. But they built a technological super civilization that supposedly still exists deep under Antarctica, etc. One of the names for this underground super civilization was called Hyperborea. And it was also the land of the midnight sun. So the occult legends describe this super civilization of Nordic godmen, master race men, who originally came from the stars. And deep under the Earth's surface, there is an underground sun called Vril, V-R-I-L. And it illuminates and gives light to this dark world deep under the ground and keeps it warm. And there's valleys and streams and waterfalls, etc. And this midnight sun called Vril not only illuminates and gives light and warmth, but the rays of that emanate from the midnight sun, Vril, are healing waves. They contain healing properties and energizing properties and properties that can expand people's intelligence and give them supernatural powers. So the rays from the midnight sun, Vril, it's called the Vril force. And the Vril force is this electromagnetic energy that has all these healing properties, expanding consciousness properties, military applications that the Nazis used to build their superior rocket, genetic, and mind control programs. In fact, if you read my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, which you really should read if you haven't gotten it. And when I say this repetitively, which I'm quite well aware that I do say this repetitively, it's not simply because I'm trying to sell books. I sell books whether I mention it or not. But my goal is to educate people, because knowledge is power, and the truth should set you free. And one thing the Lord imparted on my heart deeply, and it's a core conviction of mine, and it's a core principle in this ministry, Paul McGuire Ministries, Paradise Mountain Church. Of course, first and foremost, we teach the Word of God. We minister as Jesus told us to. First and foremost, we win souls to Jesus Christ, especially in the last days soul harvest. We make disciples of people who come involved with our ministry. That's the first order of business, obviously. But then in that spectrum of order of business, we take very seriously Jesus' words, occupy until I come, or occupy the land that God has given you. until Jesus comes. For us in America, we're to occupy the land of America until Jesus comes. If you're in Britain, you occupy Britain. But you cannot occupy America today, or Great Britain, or France, or any other place, unless you have superior knowledge, wisdom, and an understanding of technology, as well as an understanding of the kingdom of God and how to release miracles and the power of God and evangelism. You've got to know both. So what the burden I have is I see God's people attempting to win a spiritual warfare in America and in other nations, but they don't have the wisdom, the technological understanding, the scientific understanding. They don't have the knowledge of how to win a cultural warfare in terms of persuasion and effective communication. They're unaware of the fact. Look, I need you to really track with me. This is not a time to take a nap. If you need to, make a triple espresso. I'm serious. And jolt your brain alive, because the stuff I'm going to tell you now is literally the stuff that will enable you to triumph and be victorious. Or if you don't know this stuff, you're going to go down and you'll be a victim and a prisoner and in captivity. See, that's how important the knowledge of God is. And don't fall into the evangelical trap, because it's an abyss of its own sorts. You base your knowledge on what God teaches us from Genesis to Revelation. You don't base your paradigm of what knowledge is based on what the evangelical church considers knowledge, because their knowledge level is abysmally poor. They're based on their lack of knowledge and wisdom, they're losing the spiritual and cultural war for our nation. And they shouldn't be. If they would be diligent and study to show thyself approved, they could turn the tide of the battle very quickly. And that's the burden I have, is to share these things with God's people so that they can be effective and to win. Now, so we have to understand that the enemies of the gospel, and we got into this the other day, and if you're just catching me today, this is the Paul McGuire Report. You can go to paulmcguire.us, but I believe we played the program yesterday. It's absolutely essential. In fact, we should probably label part one and part two. It's absolutely essential that you fully grasp the information and teaching we gave out on yesterday's program, where I explained to you from documented historical fact with first-hand credible documentation how America was specifically targeted, because it was a Judeo-Christian nation where the people believed the Bible, and that the secretive occult elite, beginning around 100 years ago, deliberately mapped out a plan and targeted America. And their goals, just the top 4 goals, there's a lot more, according to this occult elite. Number 1, they wanted to destroy Christianity in America. Number 2, they wanted to destroy Christian marriage in America. Number 3, they wanted to destroy Christian morals and values in America. And number 4, they wanted to destroy patriotism or nationalism in America. And so they used scientific mind control. They used technology, futuristic technology that most people don't even know exists. They used the media, mind control, propaganda in the media, and they deliberately targeted those central bullet points, if you will, of what made America a great nation and a Christian nation. And they did it through a psychological warfare and occult warfare assault on America. Now, I'm not trying to pick on the church, and I know it sounds like I am a lot, and I really don't mean to, and I don't like doing it, and I wish I could say something else more positive and nice, but there's, it's like being a surgeon. If somebody comes to you with a leg that's snapped in two, you have got to put the bones back right, okay, in order for them to run and walk again. So I'm not going to default on the call that God has given me. If I have to say that the church was completely unprepared, it's not to be mean. It's to help motivate people like you to help get the church prepared, to change it. See, that's my burden, is to change it. My burden isn't I'm not trying to vent, okay? Venting isn't going to solve the problem. Teaching is. Okay, so the church was completely unaware. You have to understand how important this is. Look at this from the eyes of God. Just stop for a moment. And I'm going to share something with you. And I want you to not look at it through your eyes or my eyes or whatever. Imagine for a moment that you're looking at what I'm going to describe to you, that you're looking at it and viewing it through the eyes of God and experiencing it as God sees it. See, that's what I'm trying to get across. And if you'll do that, then you'll understand how important this is. And sometimes, I'm very passionate about what I do. But you know how it is. People don't always understand your motives. And sometimes people who don't know me judge me. Well, that's okay. But they misinterpret my passion, which is really from love and caring, as some kind of aggression or anger. And it's not anger. Yes, see, because they're misinterpreting, they're misconstruing the force of my personality, the force of the words I choose, as kind of like I'm mean or I'm picking on somebody. And that's not it at all. That's not it at all. They don't understand me, okay? I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to place blame. The reason my personality is forceful and aggressive is not out of meanness or a desire to vent. It's out of, you know what it's really out of? It's out of a broken heart. You may think, oh God, he's being corny. No, I'm not being corny. It's out of a broken heart. My heart is literally broken. And so I'm not going to sit here and sob day after day, because that wouldn't do any of us any good. But I'm telling you right now, it's out of a broken heart, because I believe it breaks the heart of God to see so many people who he wants to come to the kingdom. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Okay? God so loved the world. He doesn't want anybody to perish. And so when I speak forcefully or aggressively, I'm coming from that place of the love of God. Now, I'm trying to break through the barrier. I'm trying to wake people up so that they can get the knowledge of God, so they can be prepared, so that they can be equipped to reach all these people, because God wants to reach them, so that they will join us as our brothers and sisters in eternity, and become born again as the sons and daughters of God. That's what I'm about. And sometimes that means you have to be forceful. So I don't think I've done the greatest job explaining this, but I think that most of you get what I'm trying to say to you. I think if you're a regular listener to the Paul McGuire Report, you understand my motivation. So my burden, and it is a burden. I carry this burden 24/7. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, wherever I go. It never leaves me. It's not a burden of oppression. It's a burden of a calling. And I wouldn't give it up for a second, by the way. If you said, Paul, you don't have to have this burden. Well, and don't get me wrong. I'm not putting on myself a burden please, really, don't misevaluate me. I'm not in disobedience to the Lord, and I'm not carrying a burden that the Lord should be carrying. Don't misunderstand me. No, that's not what this is about. This is about, I chose to be a disciple, and a real disciple is somebody who picks up his cross, denies himself, and follows Jesus. Now, when you pick up Christ's cross and you carry it and follow him as a disciple, you're accepting his disciplines. That's what I mean by the burden. See, look, I know that I can't accomplish this mission. God has to accomplish it. I can't accomplish it. But I am committed to it to such a degree that I'm one with it. So I'm always thinking about it, not for the purpose of putting a burden on myself, but for the purpose of constantly seeking the Lord and asking him for help and wisdom and understanding so that we can effectively break through to these people and reach them for Jesus Christ. You know, I don't wave the banner of being an evangelist a lot. I don't call myself an evangelist. Maybe occasionally I do because somebody wants a definition. I don't call myself a Bible teacher that much, although I do occasionally. I'm a licensed minister of the gospel. I have been for, 20 years or something. Fully licensed. I'm a doctor or a professor of Bible prophecy, or a fancier title is I'm a doctor of eschatology, which is the study and teaching of Bible prophecy, with one of the most well-known and Bible-centered Christian universities and seminaries in the world. So, I'm licensed, I have my credentials, not to mention my secular credentials in education. But look, what this is all about is I'm an evangelist. The only reason I don't like to use the word evangelist is, and I'm not, disparaging anybody who does. It's just in the mission fields that God sends me into, because I asked God to send me into the mission fields where the people were the toughest, the hardest, and the most difficult to reach for Jesus, and send me to the mission field of those that have backslidden because they're alienated by the religion of Christianity. I ask God for the front lines deliberately, and if I use the word evangelist, or if I even use the word reverend or minister, or even the word doctor, it's a turnoff to these people. So I just use the word Paul. That's all. That's all. Because what is the central thing in my heart? I want to reach them for Jesus Christ, but I want to be effective about it. I'm not interested in doing a lot of religious things that don't produce results. So if you want to understand my motive, that's my motive. I just showed you my heart, okay? And there's tremendous emotion and feeling and passion and caring and genuine love for the people that I'm trying to reach. I mean, I'm being unusually candid, and I can't figure out why. But the point is, I have a tremendous amount of love for the people that I'm trying to reach. I don't usually wear that on my sleeve, but sometimes, because I'm so passionate about it, it can be misinterpreted as being aggressive or forceful and stuff. And again, that I'm not coming from a place of anger. I'm coming from a place of love. I want to smash down the walls that are keeping these people from Jesus. That's all. And that's why I ask for your help and prayers and stuff. It's not about me. Because nobody cares. When you die and go to heaven, nobody's going to remember what you did down here on earth. So that's just vanity. So I want to stop at this moment and say, look, we are in the greatest spiritual battle in the history of mankind, especially in America, but around the world. We are in the greatest spiritual battle for the hearts and souls of mankind in America and around the world. But the central battle, the very focal point of the battle, the front lines, involves trying to effectively preach the gospel and communicate biblical truths that will set individuals free. Because the people we're trying to reach have all these strongholds or satanically energized arguments from Satan. They have all these strongholds and lies and misconceptions and false ideas about who Jesus is and what Christianity is all about. So in order to reach them, you got to be like surgically smart. You have to remove those obstacles, and you have to be effective in winning them. That's the challenge. And that's what this ministry is all about. And that's why I believe we're looking at America now in a critical juncture. We talked at the opening of the program about things that could potentially happen. Well, we could potentially see some kind of nuclear or EMP event. It could be with North Korea. We could wake up one morning or hear on the news one morning that they successfully fired off a nuclear missile and it hit our troops or another nation or, God forbid, California. They say, I'm reading the news right now, California's in full speed ahead in preparedness against a nuclear attack. That's never happened before. California is scrambling to protect itself against a nuclear attack right now. And that could potentially happen. I'm not saying it will. We're going to pray that it won't. But even if North Korea subsides, we still have Iran that's threatening to do the same thing. We have other nations that want to do the same thing to us. And we have the reality of militant extremist Muslim terrorists who could sneak in a dirty bomb, an EMP, a nuke, or whatever, and it would change this world forever. Or Europe is wide open for a nuclear bomb or attack or missile. Shoulder-fired missile. You could have a fishing boat, a decrepit fishing boat, off the coast of America, just outside the, every nation has, I forgot the exact amount of miles, but I think it's 200 miles. I could be wrong. But assuming it's 200 miles, America owns the water rights 200 miles from its coasts. And so foreign navies and military ships aren't allowed to come into that. But you could have just outside the boundary of 200 miles, if that's what it is, you could have a decrepit, one of these large fishing boats. And all it would take is one person with a shoulder-fired missile. That's not a whole big deal. But it's a shoulder-fired nuclear missile who's a terrorist, and that person fires a nuclear missile off that, fishing boat and detonates a nuke in the atmosphere, which becomes an electromagnetic pulse weapon, which knocks out our electronic circuitry, and you bring America to its knees. All chaos and riots would break out. So that's just one area of danger. Another area is what I believed are the deliberately manufactured race riots, because I believe people in high places of power want to see a race war in America, and the media is fully cooperative so that they can create martial law. I believe they're stirring it up constantly. These are not spontaneous racial conflicts. These are racial conflicts that we're seeing that are deliberately being socially engineered by professionals hired by very wealthy people, that involve psychologists, they involve actors, they involve professional organizers, and certain technologies And the goal is to have America erupt into a race war so that you can create martial law. That's another thing. And then we have the weather that has been biblical in its proportions, like and earthquakes, like Mexico City just being ravaged by an earthquake, the hurricanes that hit Texas and related areas, the hurricanes that hit Florida and related areas. And I told you, within like a couple of day period, we had 40,000, this never happens in California, 40,000 lightning bolts come out of the sky. And I read one weather modification scientist make this cryptic comment. He said, looks like somebody's trying to trigger an earthquake. Well, what he was saying, and I don't understand the science of this, what he was saying is that all this voltage coming out of the sky looked like somebody was like trying to use the electromagnetic waves that come from weather modification weapons and weather modification facilities, such as the one up there in Alaska called HARP, but there's many other facilities. And you can create hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes with those things. So it wasn't long after that scientist made the comment, there was a horrible earthquake in Mexico City. But you should see the earthquake maps right now, and you can pray for us and other people. But pray for the protection of this area where we have the studio and everything. We need your prayers, just like other people need your prayers, because there has been an enormous amount of earthquake activity. Now, you can say this is natural. It may be natural. It may be related to a change in the electromagnetic atmosphere due to solar flares. That's, I'm not a scientist, but that would be an explanation, because that radically changes the electromagnetic field. So it could be a natural phenomenon. I'm not saying it's anything but a natural phenomenon produced from solar flare activity. But let's also remember that the U.S. military has been experimenting with weather modification weapons as far back as 1947. And that HARP, which is located in Alaska, and they have many HARP facilities across the U.S., and all of the major superpowers like Russia have the equivalent of like HARP facilities. And remember, HARP fires, what it does is it fires energy into the ionosphere, which boils the ions in the upper atmosphere. And this HARP facility, shooting EMF waves, electromagnetic frequency waves, into the atmosphere, that can create weather modification and weather warfare. Now, weather modification can create artificial droughts like the one in California. It can create torrential rains. It can create one hurricane after another hurricane. Weather modification can create tsunamis, and weather modification can create hurricanes. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm saying we have the technology to do it, and we've had it for a long time. And all I can tell you is I'm not a weatherman, and maybe some of you are, I don't know. But the thing is, I have a memory, and I've discussed this with my wife, and she has a memory, and I've discussed this with friends in many different states. And I'm telling you, in California, I am looking at the strangest weather patterns I've ever seen in my life. And I've been all across this country. And I've seen them in other states too. I'm seeing the weirdest cloud formations. I'm seeing storms blow in, storms blow out. And it's like unprecedented. The patterns, it looks like it's man-made weather modification. Okay, that's what it looks like. Now, I can't prove it, so it's just speculation on my part. But here's the other part of weather modification weapons. And the HARP facility was built in the 60s in Alaska. Weather modification weapons use EMF waves, electromagnetic frequency waves. to radically alter the weather. But they use a very wide spectrum of electromagnetic frequencies. But mind control technology, now, by the way, this whole thing with weather modification, EMF waves, mind control technology, the genetics, the whole thing I've been talking about is especially in the brand new book, Conquering the Matrix. It's going to be like 400 pages. And for those of you that pre-ordered it already, you've already received a discount on it because you were able to purchase it at a cheaper price, and because we're not going to charge you more because you bought it early. But we're still offering it at the lower price. At a certain point, we're going to have to raise the price of Conquering the Matrix, because when you add like 150 pages or more to a book, that substantially increases your printing costs, and it also increases your mailing costs. And so, most likely, not that we want to, we're going to have to raise the price of the book at some point. But if you pre-order the book, you get it still at the low price, and we're not going to charge you any more for it because you've been patient and waited, and that's our way of saying thank you, or at least one way of saying thank you. And I deal with all of this in Conquering the Matrix, which you can still pre-order, and after that it's just a couple of weeks, whether that's 2 or 3 weeks, I don't know. Be patient. The book's done. It's being prepped for the printer, and then it gets mailed out in the U.S. In most cases, priority mail if you live in the U.S., so you'll have it soon. Now, it explains all this. So we have a whole new technology and science called geoengineering. Many of you have heard that. And geoengineering is this idea that man can use science and technology to engineer the environment, the weather, the rain, the temperature on planet Earth with technology. Well, that's a real thing. So I want to go back to the weather modification technology, and I explain it in detail in Conquering the Matrix. You have to understand that weather modification technology uses EMF waves, electromagnetic frequency waves, but those EMF waves, now listen carefully, are the exact same waves. EMF waves are brain waves. Now, they can use some very weird brain waves, but they can use that in mind control too. The normal brain waves, or EMF waves, are alpha, beta, delta, theta, and it goes higher and lower. But within like alpha and beta and stuff, there are all these sub-frequencies. So like one frequency can bring potentially like healing to your circadian rhythms. One can reduce stress. Those are the positive things. But they can also be used to make you violent, to make you complacent, to make you depressed, to make you suicidal, to make you run naked through the streets like a zombie. See, EMF waves can be used for good or bad. Suicidal, okay? And then if you ride on top of the EMF waves, subliminal command messages, which they have the technology to do. They've had this technology since the 40s. I bring it out in the book. It's called computer-brain interfaces. They've hit it, but it's been around for a long, long time. And if you were to tap into all the cell phone transmitting towers, now let's remember there's a variety of cell phone transmitting towers. The newer ones are the most dangerous ones because they can project enormous electromagnetic frequencies. So you have what are called the, I forgot the names of them, but they're names that you would be familiar with and you would recognize them. Some of the cell phones, you know, are these tall, like antenna structures, and they generate certain kind of waves. Some of them are tall, and they look like, at least in California, they look like trees because they put this like an artificial, gigantic, skinny Christmas tree, but it's really a cell phone tower. But there's the other tower, which is shorter, and it's got these like squares on it, and it's very powerful. And you can use the national or state, all of those cell transmitting towers to generate all over the world. They can be used simultaneously to not just do cell phones, but to generate weather modification technology and mind control technology. Now, my question is this, because I've been following this. Right before I was reading that research, I happened to notice that the state of California had put in an order of 60,000 of these new powerful cell phone towers. Why would they need 60,000 new cell phone towers? Their excuses for the areas where the signal's weak. Well, maybe that's true, but that's an awful lot of power. And it can be used for dark purposes, potentially. And other states are doing the same thing. Also, you can target an individual with specific brain waves, subliminal commands, hypnotic suggestions, and you can target them to receive it through their cell phone, through their TV, through their laptop, through their house wiring. The Lily Wave, which I talk about in the new book, Conquering the Matrix, talks about the Lily Wave by Dr. John C. Lilly, where he invented a technology which allows common house current to be a carrier of mind control technology or any other kind of current. So you got to be aware of these things. They can create national moods. You could, via satellite and other technologies, and this is hypothetical, I didn't say it happened, but you could take the riot situation in Ferguson, Missouri, where people's emotions are reaching the boiling point, right? But then nobody would know it. It's silent sound. You could beam into those demonstration areas and those communities through all kinds of cell towers and electrical currents and satellites. The list is endless. You could take those angry mobs of demonstrators and you could turn the dial up through mind control weapons and make them like psychotically angry, murderous, violent. No, don't say it's not possible. It's easy. It's doable. On top of that, you can layer into the emotion of violence and rage hypnotic commands like kill somebody or murder or whatever. And this, you may think it's science fiction only because you're uneducated. They thought this stuff was coming 200 years in the future. It's here now. Okay? You got to understand that. And so when we're talking about the spiritual warfare for the hearts and minds, or the hearts and soul of America, we're dealing with technologies, we're dealing with supernatural power, we're dealing with psychological technologies, we're dealing with the power of prayer, we're dealing with communication effectiveness, propaganda. You see, we're dealing with a warfare that has many dimensions. And unless you have an above average understanding of those dimensions, you are doomed to lose the warfare. I'll give you another example how this works. And I know I'm giving a lot of information, but you can get it in Conquering the Matrix. If you pre-order it now, you'll still get the discount. And also get yourself a copy of A Prophecy of the Future of America. You don't have to be an expert on this. You don't have to be a Nobel Prize winner on this stuff. But you got to at least know the bullet points. If you know the bullet points, then when you watch television, you're going to go, aha. You see, you're going to be able to see through the propaganda. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. You can get discounts right now on the books, bulk discounts, by going to paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. You can send archives of this program and yesterday's program, where we get into all this stuff, at paulmcguire.us. We have thousands of pages of free articles that will bless you and inform you by going to paulmcguire.us. We have video of me speaking at conferences, videos of the Paradise Mountain Church meetings where I teach intensively on Bible prophecy. You can access that all at paulmcguire.us. You should make it a point of signing up. We have 2 Facebooks. Sign up to the Paul McGuire Public Figure Facebook. If you can still get on to the other Facebook. I mean, I'll tell you what I did. I used a private Facebook because I really didn't know the difference between the two. And so we maxed out at the 5,000 number like immediately. And I'll tell you more in a moment. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. You are listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. And for more information and free videos, thousands of pages of free articles, bulk discounts on the books, just a tremendous amount of programs, radio programs from the archives for free, and a list of the conferences I'm speaking at. I'll be speaking at the Big Prophecy Watchers Conference coming up October 13th in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They have 36 really well-known major prophecy teachers, so you want to check that out. And there's still time to get Conquering the Matrix at the lower price if you order it now, and then you should have it, I'm going to say 3 weeks. We'll send it to you priority mail, maybe sooner, but about 3 weeks if you've pre-ordered it. Now, for those of you that have already pre-ordered it, you already have an envelope with your name on it. So when the book comes in, boom, it gets, your book gets put in your package with your name on it, and it gets sent to you in the U.S. priority mail. Okay, so we are in the battle for the hearts and souls of mankind. This is something that I've tried to teach on. And the tragedy is that people who are trying to engage in the spiritual battle and win people to Jesus Christ and make disciples of all nations and to occupy the land until I come, they are not fully up to speed as to the weapons that the enemy is indeed really using. And you have to know your enemy to win a battle. And you can't pretend these weapons don't exist. They do exist. So there are very real reasons, for example, why 8 out of 10 kids from evangelical homes walk away from their faith in Christ by the time they enter college or college age. There's a reason for it. And the reason just isn't, it's the last days, evil will get worse and worse, or whatever superficial reason people get. There's a reason why more and more people are not accepting Christ as their Lord and their hearts are hard. There are reasons that we need to understand if we're going to effectively break through and reach these people. And that's what I'm trying to do, is teach people, educate them, and get them up to speed. And I'm specifically talking about the fact that we are up against not only spiritual forces, first and foremost. There's psychological forces. By that I mean our children and many generations have literally been brainwashed, indoctrinated, subject to social engineering to undermine their faith on a psychological level. We have to break through that effectively. We need to understand that technology, very sophisticated technology, is being used, has been used since the 1940s to control people's minds, behavior, and attitudes. And this isn't the realm of science fiction. This has been in operation for over 50 years. And it is one of the reasons why people cannot think in certain ways. So, we have a choice. We can throw up our hands in despair and say the job is impossible, but that's not true, because God says all things are possible with God. Nothing is impossible with me. And I just want to share something with you. I want to remind you of something. God called you for such a time as this, to be here now for such a time as this. God called you before the foundation of the world to be here for such a time as this. And God gave you a mission to accomplish for this time period in which you live in. Now, God knew beforehand the complexity of the world that we would be living in. Therefore, God has already downloaded you, if you will, with the talents, the gifts, and the abilities, and the knowledge you need to successfully complete your mission, even though you may have some difficult adversaries. So we have to always start at that premise. Now, God is not surprised by any of these technological weapons. We are. We're surprised. And the main reason we're surprised is because we don't think they ever existed. Now, there's a reason why we don't think they ever existed. And that's called brainwashing and indoctrination. Because the media that we watch, the educational system that we go to, etc., has lied to us since childhood. They have never responsibly done news stories or educational curriculum which talk about the reality of high-tech, futuristic technologies. So the average person doesn't even know they exist. So when you break it to them, like they're in a state of shock, they go into denial because they think, wow, you're talking in the realm of science fiction. But I'm not talking in the realm of science fiction. I'm talking in the realm of fact, because everything I write in my books, I recognize there will be skepticism. So I document it. I quote it from credible mainstream sources that are irrefutable. Let me give you an example. There is a growing awareness, especially among young people, but even adults, that during the 1950s, the U.S. government and the CIA was experimenting with what was called the MK Ultra mind control program. And that's where they take LSD and psychological programming, and brainwash somebody, and they turn a person into a Manchurian candidate who then is programmed to assassinate, let's say, a president. Now that's a real program. It was called MK Ultra, and 2 movies were made about it. The better movie is with Frank Sinatra, the first movie called A Manchurian Candidate, and then Denzel Washington did an excellent job in a recent sequel called The Manchurian Candidate. And these men, they programmed to kill high-level politicians, and then, of course, these men can't remember what they did. And it's done through mind control using LSD. Now, where did America get that technology? Well, what is somewhat of a secret, even though it's an open secret, is the fact that at the end of World War II, the CIA under Allen Dulles and Rockefeller brought into the United States, right after World War II, over 10,000 Nazi rocket mind control scientists, rocket scientists, and genetic scientists. And these were put as the heads of major scientific institutions all over the United States. They were given massive budgets. They were given a green light, and they were told full speed ahead. So they created MK Ultra here in the United States. And then they created a more advanced program called Monarch Mind Control, which essentially is, and I describe it in the book, Conquering the Matrix, tragically, your prime candidate is like 9 months old, so with little children, because they're the easiest to program. And you subject these little children at 9 months old to overwhelming shock, horror, abuse, rape, whatever. And the purpose is you inflict so much psychological, psychic pain upon them that their minds can't handle it. And the mind, as a defense mechanism, shatters into splinters or multiple personalities in order to survive. Now, that's done on purpose. Then they give the kid massive doses of LSD, sleep deprivation, repetitive recordings to brainwash them, and all kinds of very sophisticated psychological techniques, such as heavy duty doses of electroshock therapy. And what they do is they program the separate individual personalities, the multiple personalities, and they give them new names, new biographies, new assignments, new gifts and abilities. So you have a lot of people walking around who are monarch mind controlled. And let's say the average monarch mind control victim has 10 multiple personalities. This is hypothetical, but it could be easily around that. Okay, so one is programmed to be, don't be offended, this is their terminology, not mine. They're programmed to be sex slaves, or beta kitten sex slaves. And what that means is they are trained from very young childhood to sexually service, if you will, politicians, people in power of both sexes, and they're trained in the art of meeting these people's every need. They're trained on how to be a perfect companion emotionally and always smile, even if they may feel miserable inside. And their whole job is to engage in sexual activity, often in pedophilia or whatever. And then that way they've got the politician in a compromising position with video, with film, with photographs, so they can blackmail this politician or this person in power. And if they threaten to rebel or go against some secret program, they're just warned, hey, you better vote the right way, or we'll leak all this stuff that you did to the media, because you don't know the whole story. They may have got this person drunk out of their minds. You may have drugged them, got them drunk, and given them LSD, and they were high in a kite. I mean, you don't know the full story. Or maybe they just flat out did it. But in many cases, they could have been drugged out of their minds and had no idea who they were, what they were doing. And the next thing you know, there's a photographic evidence and video evidence of this horrific stuff they did, and they're blackmailed for the rest of their life. That's one of the biggest reasons for doing this. Another reason is that you can use these sex slaves as spies to develop relations with people in high places who are powerful. And they're experts at the art of pillow talk or listening in or whatever. And even though it could be a young child, this child is highly trained in interpreting and memorizing. They often have photographic memories, by the way. And they can remember word for word, and they can go back and report top secret information to certain agencies. And it's not just the United States that does this. Russia does it, Great Britain does it, China does it, Germany does it. Every superpower in the world does it. As horrible as it is, this is the spy game. Now, it's also heavily mixed in with the occult, because the spy game has always, since the beginning, been mixed in with the occult. So a lot of times these alternate personalities, these multiples, involve satanic ritual abuse, demon worship, all kinds of satanic rituals from Aleister Crowley, etc., the great Satanist. Because satanic ritual abuse, which is often multi-generational, is very similar to things like monarch mind control. Now, Marilyn Monroe, and there's no way of proving this, but many people thought she was a monarch mind control presidential model sex slave, in the sense that she was trained to be a very, very high level, sophisticated, classy sex slave, okay? And her target supposedly was President John F. Kennedy. So, not only did she have the romantic relationship with him, she had an emotional relationship. There was pillow talk, and allegedly, if the theory is correct, she was getting all kinds of confidential information about what his plans and stuff were, and as acting as a spy and giving it to very powerful groups. So this is just part of what's done. Assassination is another part. People can be trained to be, in their multiples, a genius in being a scientist, a genetic scientist, a genius in athletics. Often their athletic ability is off the charts. Their military fighting ability is off the charts. Their logical reasoning, knowledge ability is off the charts. Or their ability to perform under very difficult circumstances is off the chart. So they can go for like days without food, water, and sleep. And this is real, okay? This is real. It's happening now. And when you look at the movies, for example, Manchurian Candidate, the Bourne Identity movies, Jason Bourne, when you look at movies like The Equalizer with Denzel Washington, there's an actual TV series called MK Ultra. I mean, there's probably 50 movies out there. Salt with Angelina Jolie, where the character is a MK Ultra or monarch mind control trained military assassin with superior physical warrior abilities and agility and perception and so on and so forth. So we're just beginning the surface of what's possible here, and this is being done. Now, when I was writing Conquering the Matrix, I realized there would be skepticism, as there always is when I deal with these subjects. But I talked a great deal before I got into MK Ultra and Monarch Mind Control about the congressional hearings held by Congress, and I quoted it and I cited it, and Senator Edward Kennedy was like the key leader in this hearing where they inquired of the head of the CIA, and they asked him flat out, "Are you still carrying on MK Ultra and stuff?" And Senator Edward Kennedy was really aggressive in pursuing the questioning. And they admitted, the CIA, they admitted that during the 60s, they were active in MK Ultra experiments. But then they said, we stopped it, like I think in the early 70s or late 60s. And that's the big question. Did they really stop it? Because many experts in the field don't believe they stopped it at all. They believe they've increased it. It's just called something else. I'll leave the decision to you. But the point is, it's a matter of historical fact that it happened. It's not a conspiracy theory. And you can prove for yourself that it happened by looking up the Freedom of Information Act documents that were released from the CIA. It happened. And worse happened. There was a guy named Cameron who would get women and men, a little bit older usually, in his psychiatric hospital. I believe it was in Canada. And this guy was a monster. And what he would do is he would use electroshock therapy to erase the memories and all of the experiences of the individual over a period of time. I mean, they'd be in his mental hospital for like 2 years or 3 years. And he would erase all of their memories through electroshock. They didn't know their name. They didn't know they were married. They forgot how to go to the bathroom. They couldn't remember how to walk. They couldn't remember how to speak. It was inhuman. And these were women that were married for like 8, 10 years, who had children and husbands and a family. And guess what? I'm going to say allegedly, only because I'm trying to be careful. But it appeared, as I was glancing through the financing documentation, that the monies for these sadistic, horrible experiments were coming from allegedly CIA and Rockefeller sources. And this guy was a monster. So he did this to a whole bunch of women. So this woman completely, then he, for some strange reason, he released her. She had no memory of anything, okay? He released her back to her family. She didn't even know who they were, had no memories, had to be taught again how to use the toilet, how to be taught how to use the English language. And she over the years was making recovery. And one day she was sitting in the library and accidentally came upon like a Time magazine article about this MK Ultra monarch mind control experimentation and the horrible things they did. And then she saw the picture of the doctor who did it, which was Dr. Cameron, the guy that did it to her. And she began sobbing hysterically as the memories flooded back into her mind of what had happened in Dr. Cameron's hospital. And she realized that she was one of the people that was victimized. And so she got together with a bunch of other women that were in recovery, and they sued, as I understand it. I have the details in my book, the CIA. And it was a vicious court battle, but the judge had integrity. And it's not a lot of money considering what they went through, but each of the victims was awarded like $100,000 plus. And that was paid for by either the CIA or the Rockefeller group. But in order to get that money, I believe they had to sign some kind of document saying they would never go public with the information. But the point is, it happened. And there are estimates that during the 50s, somewhere between 40,000 and 90,000 young children were abducted from the streets all over America and programmed in these experimental programs by all these Nazi scientists that came from Germany after World War II. So we messed up a lot of people's minds. And then there were other hearings and stuff, but they denied it. They said it didn't happen. So, it did happen. Now, let's go back to this battle. You say, well, that's an extreme example. Okay, it's potentially extreme example, but it's not, and I'll tell you why. Because other estimates were projected that in the decade after that, a total of 2 million individuals were involved in this type of programming, young adults, etc. But they can't, 100% prove it. Now, here's where you have to do the math. The same formula and techniques in this Nazi monarch mind control and MK Ultra programming that can be done to an individual, the same procedures can be used to mind control, brainwash an entire population. The formula is essentially drugs, pain, and hypnosis. So these same scientific principles moved from programming individuals to the mass programming of the youth culture of the 1960s and the 1970s. This Nazi mass mind control programming was then done on a mass level. Now, you really got to come to grips with this because it changes. I'm telling you, what I'm about to share with you now will totally change your understanding of why America became the sinful nation that it became. And it's not as simple as many people are telling you it is. And it also teaches us that there's a way to win back which was stolen from us. Okay. By the way, Huxley, who wrote Brave New World and developed the concept of the scientific dictatorship, he was like the top dog in all this, leading all this. Okay, so they used the same psychological principles. Now, that's why you need to listen to the program which we from yesterday, which should be really classified part 1. This should be classified part 2, because I explain it in detail. I'm just going to go over it briefly. If you want all the details, you want to listen to yesterday's program. So what they did is they used rock and roll music, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, The Who, Rolling Stones, all of those British rock and roll artists, the British invasion. And then they raised up all the American rock and roll artists, Jim Morrison and the Doors, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Grateful Dead, Jefferson Starship, on and on and on and on. And the way they did this is, key part of mind control programming is repetition, hearing the same message over and over again until it hypnotizes you, and subliminal programming below your consciousness. So these records and the lyrics of the records and the symbols of the records said over and over again, because people would buy back then vinyl rock and roll albums. That was my generation. And you would play Led Zeppelin over and over and over again, especially if you got high, okay, or at parties. You would hear this music. Everybody knew the lyrics to just about every album, every song by heart, because they were programmed with it. And that was the major auditory programming with the symbols. Then you add the other ingredient. There's subliminal programming going on. So beneath your conscious mind, the lyrics, and there's lyrics you can't hear with your normal hearing range, they're also programming you on a deep level hypnotically, giving you hypnotic commands, okay? Exposed and backward masking. And then you add to that, what was the content of the messages? Now, let's remember that the goal, the game plan by Huxley, who wanted to create the scientific dictatorship, and the rest of that crowd, they wanted to destroy America as a Christian nation. They wanted to completely destroy it as a Christian nation and recreated it as a New Age, Luciferian, socialist nation that would become part of this great world socialist scientific dictatorship. That was the plan. So they had to destroy Christian America first. Now remember the 4 targets once again. Target number 1, destroy Christianity in America. Target number 2, destroy Christian marriage. Target number 3, destroy Christian moral values. Target number 4, destroy nationalism and patriotism, promote globalism. So that's what those lyrics are all about. The Beatles are telling you to take LSD, to smoke pot. John Lennon is telling you, imagine there's no heaven, no Christian God, no Christian heaven, no religion. Imagine there's no borders. Imagine there's no money, there's no wars. Okay, that's programming, hypnotic programming, over and over again. The other rock and roll groups are singing the same thing. They're promoting free love, love the one you're with. Crosby, Stills, and Nash. They're attacking Christianity, Christian marriage, Christian morals, and nationalism, and they're promoting drug taking, psychedelic drugs like LSD, like crazy, and they're promoting New Age mysticism and the occult, Led Zeppelin, all of them, on both the American and British rock groups. Got it? Now, so what you've created is the perfect mind control, perfect brainwashing environment. Repetition of lyrics, sleep deprivation, because people are up all night, stoned, partying, subliminal lyrics, symbols, and then you're promoting free sex, the sexual revolution. You're promoting sex, drugs, rock and roll. You're promoting the end of America and a one world government. You're promoting the end of Christianity, and you're promoting Satanism, the occult, and the New Age. And you're promoting all kinds of stuff, okay, to destroy America. It's in the lyrics. It's in the messages. It's in the movies of the time. This is mass hypnosis, mass indoctrination through multiple forms of media. Now, remember, the multiplier of all this brainwashing, the accelerator, is the use of powerful psychedelic drugs. So that's why the CIA hired Timothy Leary, the Harvard professor, to promote the usage of LSD everywhere, and he did. That's why they hired Ken Kesey, author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The government turned him on to LSD. He was the guru for the Grateful Dead. He distributed LSD to millions of people, as did Leary, and other rock and roll bands did. So all of a sudden, you're getting tens of millions of young adults, teenagers, preteens, listening to the repetitive indoctrination of rock and roll. But the big game changer for the mind is they're taking LSD and other powerful psychedelic drugs. Remember, with MK Ultra Nazi mind control programming that creates a Manchurian candidate or an assassin or monarch mind control, the essential part of the formula, besides hypnosis and shock, is LSD. Okay, so Timothy Leary, this great psychedelic guru intellectual, as it turns out, he's on the CIA payroll. And it is the CIA that is flooding the U.S. with millions of hits of acid. Okay? So people are listening to the music, taking acid, watching movies, and then there's a psychological principle. When you fundamentally break off your previous sexual moralities and you deliberately violate it, and you begin to be promiscuous and sleep around and experiment sexually with all kinds of stuff, what happens is you fundamentally shatter the human psyche. You fundamentally shatter the relationship you have with yourself and your parents. But more importantly, the psychologists behind this understand that by breaking God's commandments sexually, they're accomplishing their major goal, which is they're severing an individual's attachment to the Bible, Jesus Christ, and the laws of God, which is the end game. And then you start to promote Satanism, Luciferianism, Ozzy Osbourne, to name one. Okay? And so repetition, and the next thing you know, you got everybody wearing their hair long. It's the counterculture, free love, free sex, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They're promoting socialism, globalism, and you have changed America. And we're still moving from that context of change. So if you're Christians and you're trying to make disciples of all nations and you're trying to evangelize and you're trying to win people to Jesus Christ, you have to understand that you are fighting a multidimensional war. It's not just prayer warfare. That's essential. Calling on God, the power of the Holy Spirit, spiritual warfare is essential. The centrality of the Word of God is essential. But if you don't know really what you're up against, you're not going to break the stranglehold that the Luciferians have over the culture. And that's where we are today, right now, as I'm speaking to you. And all hell is regularly breaking loose in America and other parts of the world. There is what is left of the Christian culture that's still alive, because the undermining of seminaries and churches was also a planned operation, by the way. So you're going into the spiritual battlefield. You want to effectively win people to Jesus Christ. But you can't just preach a bunch of Bible verses, and you can't just pray and engage in spiritual warfare. You must have an understanding of the dynamics of persuasion, psychology, mass mind control, indoctrination, repetition, propaganda, so on and so forth. Why? Because if you have a rudimentary understanding of these principles, you can crack the barrier. So then you're using the Holy Spirit and the Word of God, and you're prayed up, and you're speaking the truth of God's Word, and God is backing you up. But you also use the other tools at your disposal. And those tools would be the correct use of mass media, the correct use of social media, the correct use of alternative media, and an understanding of the psychological principles and brainwashing that are capturing people's minds and paralyzing them from even hearing what you have to say. So you have to design your message, your presentation, your media outreach, your engagement in the battle for the hearts and minds of mankind. You have to incorporate a high-level understanding of this other stuff so you can break people out of the hypnotic state and turn the tide of the battle. It's doable. Now, I know I talked a lot, but I simply want to say this. You need to order a copy of A Prophecy of the Future of America. You need to get up to speed. Not a novice. You need to be a master. And then you need to teach others. You need to get yourself a copy of Conquering the Matrix. You can pre-order it now. It'll be in your house in a couple of weeks. And this is like very powerful stuff about what we just talked about. And you need to get The Day the Dollar Died and Mass Awakening and others, but those are starters. You need to understand it. You need to teach others. And then we only have X amount of time to reach a number of generations effectively in the spiritual battlefield. And that's what God has called me to do. That's why he's trained me in all these areas. And we are now building a television studio. We're building and assembling and buying the cameras, broadcast quality cameras, the air conditioning, seating. We're purchasing computer editing systems, lighting systems, satellite uplinks, computers that can generate graphics and interesting pictorials, because people are visual. If they can see it in a visual message, it will drive them home. It will drive the message home very quickly. So we're in the process of launching our media outreach through broadcast television, creation of a TV studio, televising this radio program, televising the prophecy Bible teaching at Paradise Mountain Church, and really launching the Roku Channel and all the other channels to win this spiritual war. And by the way, we intend to, of course, it's the Word of God and prayer and the power of the Holy Spirit and the message of salvation. That's the central message. But we intend to incorporate scientific principles of communication that can break people free from programming and mind control without them even knowing it in our presentations, so that we can effectively communicate and win the spiritual battle. Now, in order to do that, I need people like you who love the Lord. And if you love the Lord and you're walking in the Word, there's no way that your spirit isn't bearing witness to what I shared with you. So I'm asking you to cry out to God for our nation, and I'm asking you to go to God boldly to the throne of grace and ask God specifically, without making up your mind. Say, Lord, I want to join with Paul in the spiritual battle and reach millions for Christ. How much would you like me to donate, and how often? And whatever the Lord tells you to do, no matter how radical it sounds, or if it's simple, just basic obedience of a small amount, but you're faithful, then whatever the Lord tells you to do, do. But do it in faith and do it in rejoicing. And then we need people who will say, Paul, I want to be a prayer war with you. I recognize you're on the front lines. I can't imagine what you go through on a daily basis. But I'm going to pray for you as a true intercessor. And I'm going to be committed to doing that. And others, you can help spread our message. Together, just a handful of us, you, me, and everybody who's listening, we can change the direction and destiny of America. So I'm asking you to go to paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. You can donate there. You can write a check there. And you can help finance this spiritual war. There's other stuff that I'm dying to tell you, but the time is not right. Soon, very soon, we are going to make a major impact in one of the most powerful places in our nation. And it involves books and it involves media, but I can't say it now. But you'll be the first to know, and I'm going to need your prayers and financial help to do it. And we will. I mean, we're going for broke, but I don't intend to go broke. We're going to do it in Jesus' name. God bless you. Visit paulmcguire.us.